OTTACK.
So I wrote my college thesis on Revolutionary Girl Utena. I spent a really long time thinking about that show, but I'd never seen this one. And the influence that this manga had on Revolutionary Girl Utena is really, really obvious. Everything from the character design to the symbolism of the roses and stuff is like all replicated there. And the character of Oscar is a hugely important, like, you know, predecessor to Tenjo Utena.
Welcome back to 2 AM OTTACK. I'm your host Mayu, a born and raised Japanese no-otaku, and
I'm Cisco, an American otaku.
In this podcast, we share reviews of anime and the manga through distinct perspectives with commentary on Japanese culture, history, and the language. Cisco,
Yep.
We just watched the 2025 film of the Rose of Versailles.
Versailles?
Versailles? Huh?
Just Versailles.
Versailles, because it's pronounced differently. Japanese, I only know the Japanese pronunciation.
Yeah, I mean, the Japanese pronunciation is based on the French pronunciation. Versailles, Versailles.
Versailles,
Yeah, so it's, you know, I think at some point, I feel like in one of the songs, the Japanese singers who are singing in English say the word Versailles, but pronounced it Versailles. And I was like, oh, I guess nobody told you it's the same word. But yeah, yes, it's Versailles.
Okay. Well, anyway, I'm glad finally we watched it.
Me too.
Because I was wondering what the story is about basically my entire life.
I guess that's fair. I've known about this manga since at least 2004. And I've never read it. And now I finally watched the movie and it felt like I should probably read the manga still. But yeah.
Right. Well, it was the fictional story written in 1972 by Riyoko Ikeda. And I remember my mom had a manga.
Oh, really?
And I read some of it, but I didn't get the a whole gist of it. Yeah. I just know there's like badass woman in there, which was true.
That's the main point of the story.
Yeah. Before we start, we would like to hear from you. Share your thoughts, idea, questions, or even suggestions that we should talk about. Send us message to the email in the description, or you can use Spotify and YouTube comments section as well. So today we're going to talk about the Rose of Versailles.
It's not Versailles, it's Versailles.
Versailles, damn it. We're going to talk about the history behind the Rose of Versailles. Versailles. I can't. Versailles, the life of Marie Antoinette. I'm screwed.
Marie Antoinette.
Antoinette. And this awesome character, Oscar. Also, our thoughts about the film and today's word of the day. All right, Cisco, before we dive into it, can you introduce the plot of the Rose of Versailles?
You nailed it. Okay, yes, I can. So I should note that this only really applies to the movie we just watched. I don't know if the story is exactly the same in the manga or the movie, the live action movie they made, Lady Oscar, or the
animation series?
Or the manga remake they made from 2013 to 2018. So I only know the movie that came out in 2025. Anyway, the plot starts off by following Marie Antoinette, who as a young teenager gets betrothed to the Dauphin of France and moves to France to marry him. She is assigned as the head of her royal guard, a woman, Oscar Francois, what's her last name? How did I forget already? Oh, it's like Jarget, right? It's like a really hard like French name. Yeah, okay, that's why I forgot. Yeah. Even as we were watching it, I was like, God, I'm never going to be able to spell that later. And Oscar is a woman, but is in charge of Marie Antoinette's safety because she's strong and she's noble. And I guess when I say noble, not just noble in bearing, but also noble in blood. She's the daughter of a noble family, and her father has decided to raise her as a man. Well, not exactly as a man, but raise her as his heir, meaning she gets an aristocratic education in both sort of military skills like fencing and also like arts and letters and stuff. So Oscar's also the same age as Marie, not that much older.
Not clear.
They seem to be very close in age, which is ridiculous because that makes her 14 when she starts guarding the future queen, which is like just sort of silly. Oscar's the bodyguard, Marie's the queen, or is the, the princess, I suppose. And then when the old king dies, Marie ends up the queen and Oscar's her bodyguard. There's a love triangle that develops between Marie and this Swedish guy, von Fersen, who Oscar is also kind of into, but is not that open about her feelings for. And Oscar has a manservant who's a commoner named Andre, who is always around and, you know, sort of like defending her. Well, actually, not really defending her, but
grew up together.
Yeah, they grew up. They're sort of like childhood friends. It's clear that Oscar's better at fighting than Andre, but Andre is brave in sort of standing up for and serving Oscar. So the story kind of goes on until we get close to the French Revolution, at which point Oscar becomes more and more concerned about the welfare of the people of France and also disillusioned with Marie Antoinette's kind of lavish lifestyle and inability to care about regular people. There's some intervention with von Fersen, who, even though he's in love with Marie Antoinette, goes abroad and then comes back later and they're still in love and will they, won't they? And eventually he leaves again. And Oscar departs from Marie's service to join the French Guards, the French Guards, and then struggles to sort of lead the French Guards and earn their trust. And then eventually, during the opening stages of the French Revolution, leads the French Guards to protect the people against the king's armies and also to storm the Bastille. That's the plot. I've given enough away.
Yeah, thank you. So this was distributed by Toho Next and the Avex Pictures, and the animation is by MAPPA. The reason why they made the new version of film is in celebration of the series' 50th anniversary.
Wasn't that like 3 years ago?
Yeah, but like on the 50th anniversary, they announced
they were going to make it. Okay,
yeah,
got it.
Yeah, so it's more than 50 years right now.
Wow, that's crazy. Woof.
Yeah, I didn't expect that was musical.
Yeah, well, and is it a musical, really?
50% musical?
Yeah, the first half is a musical. The second half is not a musical.
It's more than I expected.
It's much more than I expected. I didn't realize it was going to be a musical at all. But like, there was the opening that didn't have music. And then there was a moment where it seemed like it was an opening theme song. And I was like, wow, this is a pretty long opening theme song for a movie. And then like 5 seconds after it was over, another one started, and I was like, oh, it's a musical. It's not just a regular movie. But I think what it actually is that the part of the story they really wanted to tell in the movie is the French Revolution part of the story, which is the end. And so they had to like montage together all of the early stuff in like a bunch of like very interestingly executed montages that tell you a lot of story in like a really short amount of time. But read somewhere that there is a South Korean stage play adaptation of the Rose of Versailles. I wonder how much of that like informed this film by forcing them to kind of like cut down the material and like condense parts of it into montages. And I mean, anime is really good for montages, right? You can do a lot of really interesting things in animation that you kind of can't get away with in even a regular film. But so it's got like an interesting component to it.
Yeah. I mean, Takarazuka already did it too.
Right.
They have the material maybe. Okay, so let's talk about the history behind of this, the Rose of Versailles. All right. Shall we talk about Marie Antoinette?
Okay, sure. So Marie Antoinette was an Austrian princess. Her mother and father were the Habsburg monarchs of Austria, which was, you know, a huge empire at the time. And she's the youngest daughter. So she was pretty much spoiled rotten growing up. Like in my view, that's an opinion. That's a hot take, not like necessarily fact. But her tutors basically said, like, she's pretty, she's charming, she likes music, and she's good at getting away with stuff, but she doesn't study very hard. And
she was great at music, huh?
Yeah, so she was good at music, and she was like clever, but she didn't want to like work and apply herself at stuff. And like, I think especially like studying different languages and things. So I mean, you know, when you're the baby daughter of one of the richest people in the world at the time, like, it's not that surprising to me that you grow up a little spoiled. She was engaged to be married to the Prince of France, basically as a way to unite Austria and France politically. And so, you know, her other siblings also grew up to be super important people. One of her older brothers was the friggin' Holy Roman Emperor at the same time. So she was from a powerful family. When she got to France, there was some political intrigue with with mostly her father-in-law's mistress and like whether or not she would be nice to her or not. But she had a hard time settling into the French court and eventually became popular. There was a woman at court called Madame Pompadour, who is the woman who invented the Pompadour hairstyle. But Marie Antoinette was also like really into big hair. So she did a lot of like puffing up her hair, and she was really into fashion. And she also, you know, I mean, again, I think this is like because she grew up very, very wealthy, she was totally fine with spending all of the French government's money on like diamonds and jewels and stuff.
Let's stop it there. So to make the crazy hairstyle,
Yes.
they used animal fat
Yeah.
and dust
Yes.
to make it, and sometimes they have to sleep on it, right? To keep the hairstyle. And then they eventually had some kind of like bugs and stuff.
Well, yeah. So like once you got your hair done in the style, you probably didn't want to have to like redo it that way because it took several hours to set it.
And using like, metals inside?
Yeah, there were like pins. Like, you know, it was very, very complex to get this kind of hairstyle. And we didn't have like hairspray yet. So yeah, animal fat, like, you know, dust, like it had to set into place and then you kind of couldn't move it. It often had like feathers in it. And then like when you slept, you would have like a special thing to support your neck and head so that your hairstyle didn't get ruined while you were sleeping. But if you went a couple days without like washing it afterwards, it could get like predictably kind of gross. So I think they said the term like talking about someone's hair as a quote rat's nest probably came from this time period and this hairstyle. But yeah, so it was really intense.
Yeah. And then the why like do we see only not only but like a lot of pictures of her in gray hair?
So that's from the dust or like, you know, whatever they were using to hold the hair together basically by like sprinkling that on it. And it was just the fashion of the time to like
having gray hair.
Yeah, well, having like, you know, hair that was whitened in order, I think, partly to keep the hairstyle. But yeah, so her hair being blonde in the animation is unrealistic.
All right. Thank you. Sorry for stopping you.
Where was I?
About the fashion and spending a lot of money.
She spent a lot of money. One of the reasons she has such a bad reputation as someone who spent a lot of money is this thing that didn't really happen where the previous king of France's like mistress ordered an enormously expensive diamond necklace from some jewelers. Then she died before she could pay for it. So the jewelers really needed to get their money back and they tried to sell it to Marie Antoinette. And she was like, I am not going to buy this thing. It's too much money. And then a like courtier at the court convinced the jewelers to try to sell it to her, and that she was like acting on Marie Antoinette's behalf to buy it and forged her signature. And so there was a piece of paper being like, Marie Antoinette said she would buy this, even though she actually didn't. And then the girl who like forged the signature eventually sold it to like England or something, like totally just took the money and ran. The guy who forged the signature eventually went to jail. But people, when the king confronted Marie Antoinette being like, did you say you were going to buy this outrageously expensive necklace? She was like, no. And the king believed her. And people thought, oh, she totally said she would. And now she's like tricking the king. And like later it all came out that like it wasn't. She was actually innocent. But like no one believed that because she had been such a big spender in her life up until that point. So yeah, she gets a lot of heat for having not been more careful with the kingdom's finances. Not that it was like up to her. There's a lot, you know, this movie takes pains to point out it's not really her fault. She's not the only person. But against the backdrop of like dire poverty in France, you know, she wasn't going around trying to like help make it better. She was living the high life with her, you know, her court. And so yeah, she became like a less popular person over time. I think when she first arrived, she kind of won people over because she was young and pretty and charming. And then there were a lot of rumors that she was sleeping around and that the king's, you know, her children weren't really the king's children, that she had cuckolded him by sleeping with other guys, which she seems to have had at least a very like romantic like relationship with somebody else, whether it got physical or not, kind of hard to say, but she did have some dudes she was very emotionally close to. So you never know. But yeah, by the end, like she got caught up in the French Revolution, didn't manage to escape. And, you know, 9 months after her husband was put to death during the revolution. So that's the story of the real Marie Antoinette. And this movie is pretty faithful to her character.
Yeah. In the film, we saw a glance of poster.
Yeah.
Which looked like Mary and ostrich combined.
Yeah, it's an ostrich with her head eating like some cookies or, madeleines or something.
It was such a short moment.
Right.
It was like, what is that?
Yeah. And it's based on a real poster that was created at, the time of the French Revolution in 1789 of her as an ostrich. And the joke there is that the word for Austrian and the word for ostrich in French are very similar. They're portraying her as an ostrich/Austrian and ridiculing her for opposing the new constitution.
Do you want to talk about the famous quote?
Let them eat cake. So Rousseau put in a book that he wrote when Marie Antoinette was still living in Austria that a quote famous princess had said, let them eat brioche, which is like a fancy kind of bread, but not exactly cake. But given the fact that it shows up in Rousseau's work before Marie Antoinette was even Queen of France yet, means she is not the original source of that quote. After 50 years after the French Revolution, some other French guy writes a book and puts in his book her saying, let them eat cake, or, let them eat, let them eat brioche, in the context of her response to the October March, right, where the women of Paris march on Versailles being like, we don't have any bread. What do you got? But she almost certainly did not actually say that.
From the baker's perspective, brioche is a fancy bread because it needs milk, eggs, and butter, a little bit of sugar. So it's kind of similar to cake.
It's closer to cake than it is, than other types of bread.
So it's like something the commoners can't buy easily.
Right. If you can't even buy black bread, you're definitely not buying brioche.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about this awesome character, Oscar. She is awesome.
Yes,
she
is
so great. I love her.
I think that's how many women feel about Oscar.
I think that's a big attraction of this anime, manga, and the film. Of course, this is a fictional character, but there's a person who became a model.
Yeah, there's a person who's thought of as the inspiration, especially for what happens in the end of the show. There was a guy, just a regular dude, who was a commoner and joined the French Guard and worked his way up to an officer position and then quit and went back to running a business, who during the storming of the Bastille showed up with 70 men and 5 cannons to help force the Bastille to surrender, and who was also instrumental in both getting the people inside the Bastille to give up and in protecting them from the mob once they had surrendered. So that was a real guy. But he was a guy. He definitely never worked for Marie Antoinette and was a commoner and was then not actually leading the French Guard during the revolution. He just got a bunch of old soldier buddies to come with him and help him take down the Bastille. But that parallels some of what Oscar is doing at the end of the movie. And that guy was real.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And then I was not sure about Hans, the character, the person who fell in love.
Von Friesen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's a real
that
person.
Dude's totally real. He's maybe the most, I don't know that you want to say the most accurately portrayed historical person in the film, but yeah, he was a real guy. He met Marie Antoinette when they were 18. He talked to her for several hours at a party without knowing who she was, then found out she was, the Dauphinée, and was like, oh snap. Then went away for a couple years, then came back, and they seem to have had an intense romantic connection. Again, whether physical or not is sort of unclear, but certainly a lot of rumors about that. He spent a lot of time with her. He showed up at her card parties. They knew each other well. And then as the rumors started to swirl around them, he left in 1780 to go fight in the American Revolutionary War under Rochambeau. And so he met George Washington and had nice things to say about him and stuff. He was in the American Revolution, basically. And then came back to Paris again and spent the rest of his time in Paris, where I think he kind of had a better sense of propriety after that. But he was instrumental in trying to help the king and queen escape from the Tuileries when they were imprisoned in Paris. And everyone except Marie Antoinette, I think, got out. The rest of them got in the carriage and went to another town and got in another carriage and went to another town. But then they all got caught. And so after they got caught and it became public knowledge that he had helped them try to escape, he had to flee the country and he went to Germany and then was working on trying to get Marie Antoinette out of France, couldn't put a workable plan together before she was executed. So that's pretty sad. And whether he was always deeply in love with her as is portrayed in the show is, up for debate a little bit. But I think there were some letters found kind of recently that suggested they had a very intense connection. Again, physical, maybe not, but romantic. Oh yeah, that part's real.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, then let's talk about our thoughts about this film. You were talking about like you understand better about Revolutionary Girl Utena.
Yeah. So I wrote my college thesis on Revolutionary Girl Utena. I spent a really long time thinking about that show, but I'd never seen this one. And the influence that this manga had on Revolutionary Girl Utena is really, really obvious. Everything from the character design to the symbolism of the roses and stuff is like all replicated there. And the character of Oscar is a hugely important, like, predecessor to, Tenjo Utena in Revolutionary Girl
Even
Utena.
the hairstyle.
Yeah, the hair. Well, Utena's hair is pink and it's pretty straight, but she does have long hair, quote, like a girl, even though she is trying to be a prince for most of the show and wearing like a male uniform and stuff. But that show has it's examining a lot of the same ideas about what does it mean to be both a woman and like in a masculine role, but without being a masculine person. So yeah, I really enjoyed watching this and getting to know Oscar as a character because of my deep love for Utena as a show.
I just enjoyed it, like Oscar being a strong woman, and I also like the love triangle between those like main four characters. It was like very classic,
totally
anime from 70s.
Yeah.
And like those eyes.
The eyes are pretty intense. Yeah. With the stars, like the 8, like whole constellations in their eyes, right?
It's so sparkly.
So many stars.
But I remember like when I try to like mimic, like, drawing like pictures from manga, that's how I drew it. And then it was like kind of nostalgic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some of the hairstyles are pretty 70s. And there's a couple of different scenes where it really seems like Oscar's wearing bell bottoms, which is hilarious because I'm pretty sure bell bottoms like were not the style in Revolutionary France.
Also, there's 2 scenes of Oscar and Andre in the cloud, like holding each other and in a Greek style.
Yeah, I mean,
clothes.
there's some of that does feel like an intentional callback to Castor and Pollux, the twins, the constellation Gemini, the idea that they're sort of like the same person, which is playing a lot with like, their genders, right? Like I read some like quick criticism via Wikipedia of like people being like, oh, this relationship between Andre and Oscar is kind of the forerunner of like boys love type stories where they are equals or like, they are treating each other as equals, even though she's technically a woman and he's technically a man. There's a lot of like erasure of like what their genders mean, partly because they're in a role reversed relationship and partly because she's fighting for liberty, equality, fraternity. And, all those, like all of that sort of plays into that. But yeah, there's several characters actually who show up in sort of like Greek inspired clothing. And when it's Andre and Oscar, again, it seems like a callback to Castor and Pollux, the Gemini twins. When it's the other two, I can't remember exactly like which Greek myth or like thing they're drawing on there, but I have a feeling it's probably like another specific reference to like something from Ovid or whatever.
I wonder what the perspective is like for viewers who knew about this back in 70s.
Like to see it again now? Yeah. I wondered whether the presentation of Oscar wasn't like sort of more feminine in this movie than, I mean, I think they're probably drawing on the source material pretty closely because it's like an homage, but I wondered whether, the 70s is kind of like a really feminist decade. And like the 2020s do not feel like a very feminist decade to me. And maybe that's something more in America than Japan. But like, it was really interesting to watch this from like a 2025 perspective, being like, are the moments where Oscar is feeling more like a quote unquote woman, retrograde, right? Are they celebratory? Are they kind of like the culture pushing back? Do I, as someone who grew up in like the 90s and 2000s, like want Oscar to like reject femininity because that's what like true feminism is? Or like, is it okay to like have both? Like, I think the 1970s story is exploring that. And I think the 2025, version is still exploring that, that may be sort of like an unresolved question in our culture of like, can you be both feminine and strong? Do you have to give up one of these things to have the other? Like, what does it mean to try to be both? And I think part of what makes Oscar such a great character is Oscar like doesn't really sacrifice her femininity in order to be like, powerful, but always shows up in male clothes. Like totally has sort of like male to male interactions with most of the other people around her, like is not actually transforming the role of what it means to be a woman, is just a woman in a male role. And that doesn't really seem like it's changing like everything. And so I think there's, Revolutionary Girl Utena has different thoughts about that, but is still asking a lot of the same questions, like who does the revolution and who is it for? And like, what do you have to like be like in order to be able to pull that off? So I think all those questions are still kind of hanging there.
All right. Okay, let's do word of the day.
All right.
OTTACK, word of the day.
Today's word of the day is hokori.
Hokori, pride.
Not the dust.
Not the dust, not the dust. Yeah, pride. And I think the reason that I thought this might be a useful word to know about is often when Oscar's looking at Marie Antoinette, especially in the latter part of the show, Oscar describes Marie as full of pride, proud, regal, dignified, all those sort of words.
In a good way and a bad way.
Yeah, both. Also, Oscar also cares about pride, or is sort of noble in ways that are different from the ways in which Marie is noble. The symbolism for both characters is a rose, because it's the Rose of Versailles. But Marie's rose is a red rose, and Oscar's rose is a white rose. The same symbolism shows up in Revolutionary Girl Utena too. But the red rose is sort of like, it's the color of literal blood. Marie is a blood-born royal who thinks blood matters and makes her the queen, and she's beautiful and full of pride about who she is and what she represents, but is also sort of like the more corrupt of the two, right? Kind of has an affair, right? At least an emotional affair with someone who's not her husband, can't give up her sort of lavish ways, refuses to let go of that sort of pride. Oscar's nobility comes really from her spirit, not from her bloodline. Yes, her family's noble, but she throws away her noble medal at the end and says, and is fighting for the cause of the French Revolution, liberty, égalité, fraternité. So that Oscar also has quite a lot of pride, but it's linked to being a good person, not being, the right kind of, or, born from the right family.
Got it. All right. Anything else you'd like to before we end? There's
a reference in the show to a novel, Julie or the New Heloise, by Rousseau, which is a real novel that, is examining some of the same issues that Oscar is sort of thinking about, duty, love, passion, some other stuff. It's really long. It's like 600 pages. I've never read it. I'm not really planning to read it. It was an enormous hit in the 1700s. It was very widely read by people at the time. And I think the crux of the story is very much like a love story of a love that can't be, consummated, and how do you live with that afterwards? And so some of the story of Marie Antoinette and von Fersen and of Andre and of Oscar is sort of replicated there in what it thinks about virtue and about love. So it's cool that they kind of shout out that book, and same human themes just keep coming back around century after century.
That's true. Well, kind of this entire time I was watching the film, I couldn't help thinking about Les Mis, and weirdly, it makes me want to watch Les Mis.
Yeah, Les Mis is not about this French Revolution.
Oh.
Yeah, no? France has had a lot of revolutions, it turns out. Les Mis is about a failed revolution from the 1840s.
Okay.
But in Les Mis, the spoiler alert, the rebels lose. At the end, they're like the people of Paris sleep in their beds. They're not rising. Nobody's coming. We're just going to die here, right? So it's not the French Revolution of 1789. It's a later French Revolution that didn't succeed, where they failed, right? But it's still about people in poverty and people who are struggling and suffering and the human condition. Yeah, the story is about a different time period, but it's got a lot of the same themes about caring about people and nobility and love and some of those other things. And yeah, I really didn't mind a lot of the songs in this movie. I liked them more than I thought I was going to.
It's very Japanese.
But I was bothered by how much of it was in English. I was surprised by how good the pronunciation of the English is, given that they're all like Japanese singers, like they clearly had some voice coaches come in and be like, guys, this is how you pronounce things in English. Okay.
As I can remember correctly, the voice actor who did Oscar is really good at English.
No kidding. So the English pronunciation is like way more on point than you usually hear in like typical J-pop, which is like kind of weird, but kind of cool, but kind of threw me off a little bit. And a lot of English in the songs. Like usually it'll be like one or two words in English in a J-pop song. Here you have like 3-4 sentences in a row in English.
Maybe they're trying to like have a vibe or like a European.
Yeah, but then why not do it in French?
I know. Then people wouldn't understand in Japan.
I don't know. There's a lot of like random French in Japan too.
Yeah, that's true.
Anyway, it was fine. But yeah, Les Mis has better music. Sorry, you're not going to top. You're not going to top Les Mis in your music score. Yeah. So it was a good movie overall. But yeah, the music was, you know what, on its own, great. But Les Mis is better.
Would you recommend this anime to your students?
I think it would depend on the student. I think like you kind of have to be in the market for a shoujo anime to really enjoy this.
That's
I think
true.
Like I think if you're someone who watches anime and is like, you know what's really good? Solo leveling. No, like this is probably not for you. But if you've ever seen Revolutionary Girl Utena and you were like, that was pretty interesting, this is great. And if you like Les Mis, you would probably enjoy this story. It's got a lot of the same type of beats in it. You know, like for the right person, yeah, I would recommend it. Like it is an interesting thing. But I also just like kept getting the feeling as I watched this movie that I wish I had read the manga, especially in the first half of the film when they're like recapping everything in these like really short montages that are obviously showing you like the most famous panel from like the arc that they're skipping in like 15 seconds. It made me curious to read the manga and like get like a deeper version of the story. So I think in that sense, it was a good sort of like ad for what the manga was. And the actual animation is gorgeous. And the montages where you can tell that's like where a lot of like Mappa's like original like design came into it are beautiful. Yeah, I would recommend it to people who like shoujo manga, and I would recommend it to people who are interested in French history, and I would recommend it to people who think an anime musical is a cool idea. And I would not recommend it to people who are like, One Piece is the best, you know? Maybe not One Piece, maybe, but if you're like, if you're like Bleach is the best, I'm going to be like,
the
not
My
for
Hero
you.
Academia, like some Jump manga.
This is not in the same category as this.
That's true. All right. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. If you liked this week's episode, please give us good reviews on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, or like and leave a comment on YouTube. Make sure to subscribe and follow 2AM OTTACK and 3AM OTTACK. It will keep us making more fun episodes. See you next time for more 2AM OTTACK.
Peace.